$3 million. That was all it took to transform my family into strangers. Or perhaps they were strangers all along, and my grandfather's inheritance simply revealed them for what they truly were. I've been sitting in my car for the past hour, ruminating on how the same parents who raised me diligently planned my destruction while ruining my reputation with our extended family. I'm a 34-year-old software developer, and 6 months ago I believed I had a normal family. Now I sit here and come to the realization that everything I thought I knew about my family dynamics up until now has been deliberate manipulation. That was before everything changed with my grandfather's inheritance. He died 6 months ago, leaving a considerable estate, one none of us anticipated. My grandfather had always lived humbly in the same 2-story house where he had lived since the 1970s, drove the same reliable Toyota for 20 years, and appeared happy with his simple existence. But, as it happened, he'd made some incredibly smart bets on real estate and tech stocks in the 1980s. I remember him speaking about buying Apple stock when everyone thought he was nuts, and buying commercial properties in what were at the time undesirable neighborhoods that eventually became prime real estate. He had a knack for finding potential where most saw risk. This is something we shared in our conversation about technology and business strategy on weekends. He became more than a grandpa, he became a mentor to me, and one who has influenced so much of the way I approach my career and finances. When the will was read, I found out he bequeathed me around 70% of his estate, worth around $2,800,000. The other 30% was divided between my younger sister Sarah and my parents. I was stunned, to put it mildly. I had always been close with my grandfather. I spent weekends helping him with his computer and listening to him talk about his business dealings, but I never thought he would show me such favoritism in his will. The immediate aftermath was uncomfortable, but bearable. At the reading of the will, there were tight smiles and forced best wishes, but I could sense the tension mounting. I had a particularly quiet sister who had always struggled financially, despite endless support from our parents. Sarah had always been the family's golden child, beautiful, engaging, and socially suave in a way that most of us aren't. But she'd never really gotten on her feet professionally, job hopping and needing my parents to bail her out financially constantly. I tried to contact her afterwards, but she dismissed me, saying she needed time to process the whole thing. What I didn't understand then was that this was the start of a premeditated campaign of emotional manipulation that would play out over the next several months. In hindsight, I can see how it all unfolded in a well-crafted and systematic way, like a chess game, and I wasn't even aware I was a player in it. The smallest changes in the ethos of family life, the premeditated comments, the slow extirpation, how well it was wrought. It started with small things. Family dinners were becoming increasingly uncomfortable, with thinly veiled jabs about privilege, responsibility. My mother would say that Sarah had supported them tirelessly even when she had no money while I was too busy with my career. She had conveniently overlooked the many hours I spent helping them get their home office set up during the pandemic, or the countless times I drove across town at ungodly hours to fix their internet problems. My father would offer pointed commentary about family duty and sharing blessings, referencing stories from our childhood in which Sarah had sacrificed for me, even though his version of events rarely matched my own recollections. The Sunday dinners that once helped nurture a family turned into psychological warfare. Each meetup was designed to supercharge liberal guilt and deactivate any power I had to excuse myself. They would invite other relatives without asking me, and I would be outnumbered in any discussion. The talk would invariably turn to family loyalty and the importance of standing by one another. With meaningful looks in my direction, I initially dismissed it, thinking they just needed time to acclimate to the new dynamic. Next were the social media posts. Sarah started posting vague but pointed statements about betrayal in the family and the hurt of feeling undervalued. Her Instagram stories turned into a carefully curated show of struggling but positive content, punctuated by quotes about toxic family members and the need to heal from betrayal. Attaching fear One major effect of setting boundaries was the very real fear of what my family would do. A minefield followed. Our extended family started contacting me, asking what was wrong, why I was being difficult. It turned out that my parents had been informing relatives that I refused to help Sarah, portraying me as a greedy villain who somehow convinced my grandfather to change his will. The story they devised was insidious in its effectiveness. In their telling, I had secluded my grandfather in his last years, using his love of technology against him to manipulate and exploit him. They conveniently forgot that our grandfather had been sharp as a tack and fiercely independent to the end. They didn't mention that he had tried over and over to mentor Sarah in business, offering to help her start her own company, only to have her dismiss his advice as old-fashioned. The escalation came 2 months ago, when Sarah lost her job. She worked as a marketing coordinator, but was laid off during a company restructuring. Rather than trying to find another job, she moved back in with our parents and started concentrating on her influencer career on Instagram. She had around 5,000 followers and thought she was on the cusp of making it huge in the social media universe. That was when the actual pressure started. I'm the youngest, and my parents called a family meeting in which they ambushed me with a prepared speech about my obligation to support Sarah. They'd arranged for her to have a luxury apartment in the city's most expensive quarter, arguing that her textbook in miters would do with video content in a particular part of town. The rent was $4,500 a month, and they wanted me to pay it, plus her living expenses until she was back on her feet. They had even made a PowerPoint about the investment potential of funding Sarah's influencer career, including projected earnings based on wildly optimistic engagement numbers. I was astonished at their audacity, but against my better judgment said I would help temporarily, and so I put together a 6-month plan to cover her rent, figuring it would buy her some time to find another job and would show the family that I was supporting whatever transaction had taken place. I emphasized that this was a stopgap solution, not a long-term arrangement. I even offered to help her get a job in tech marketing using my professional network, but she turned me down, saying a job would get in the way of creating content. Well, things improved in the little while. Sarah settled into her new apartment and family tension seemed to dissipate. She began posting more online, posting photos of her entrepreneurial journey and manifestation workspace that she clearly staged. What I didn't know was that, while she was presenting herself as a self-made businesswoman in her public life, she was spinning an entirely different narrative behind closed doors. I found out that Sarah had been telling our friends that I had stolen her inheritance by manipulating our grandfather in his last years. She accused me of having estranged him from the family and persuaded him to rewrite his will in my favor. In her telling, I had used my interest in technology to alienate someone from the entire family, especially from her. She told people that I had set up monitoring software on his devices to control his communications and had convinced him that she was reckless with money. I had just shared interests and values with my grandfather. We were both passionate about technology and business, and he had guided me throughout my career. What we talked about over the weekends in terms of market trends and investment strategies was bonding on a sincere level, not a manipulation tactic. The will had been his own choice, and I had no say in it. But Sarah's story was more dramatic and attractive to people who didn't know the whole story. The damage to my reputation was systematic and widespread. Friends I had counted on for years started to look at me differently. Coworkers who heard the rumors through mutual friends began to shun them. Even my longtime girlfriend began to doubt our relationship and question if the stories of my manipulative personality were true. The seclusion was slow, moving yet relentless, leaving me trapped in my ideas and fears, alone. It was last week that the last straw arrived. I also went to a cousin's wedding and, after arriving, was seated at a table in the far corner, far away from all other family members. Throughout the evening, I heard whispers and saw pointing fingers. My aunt even confronted me, directly telling me I was a manipulative gold digger who had ripped the family apart. The bride, a childhood friend, hardly acknowledged me, and later told mutual friends that she had invited me only to keep the peace. That night I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I scoured Sarah's social media accounts. What I found was infuriating. She was using the very apartment I was financing to make content around living your best life and manifesting wealth, all while posting bitter remarks about inheritance inequality and family betrayal on her private accounts. She was weaponizing the narrative on both ends of our family situation, turning us all into social media fodder. Her output was a double-speak masterclass. She was the go-go entrepreneur hustling for success in her luxury apartment, on her public profile. She became the victim of family betrayal in private Facebook groups and on her Finsta account, earning sympathy and support from strangers who had only heard one version of events. She had also started a private blog chronicling her healing journey from family trauma, with long and detailed and mostly fictional versions of how I had purportedly manipulated our grandfather. I also found out that she had been subletting one of the apartment's rooms on Airbnb, collecting the money while I paid the entire rent. This was in direct violation of both the lease agreement and our arrangement. She had been listing the room for $200 a night, advertising it as a luxury stay with influencer vibes. The last note was a chain of private messages between Sarah and our mother, discussing how to get me to finance Sarah's influencer lifestyle on a permanent basis, with our mother instructing her on which emotional triggers to pull. The messages were revelatory. They discussed lifting everything from what childhood memories to mention to make me feel guilty, to how to use our grandfather's death against me to make me look like someone who had changed after receiving the inheritance. They had spreadsheets tracking which manipulation tactics had worked best for me, and plotted future scenarios about how to maintain my financial support. It was premeditated, ruthless, and it wiped out any vestiges of doubt we had about their real aims. That was when everything fell into place. I had been playing into their hands, letting them manipulate me with guilt and family obligation. The following morning I called Sarah's landlord and told them I would not be continuing rent payments beyond the current month. I had also sent them proof of the subletting so Sarah could not continue to swindle other people through the property. The fallout was nuclear. Sarah called me screaming that I had shattered her life and career. She said she was about to close some big brand deals that now would be impossible without her luxury apartment backdrop. The parental unit went on an all-out assault and called every family member to tell them I was making their youngest daughter homeless out of spite. The family text chain blew up with messages calling me heartless and asking how I could even consider such a thing. But after months, I finally felt at peace with my decision. I wrote a long email to the whole family with screenshots of Sarah's social media duplicity, the Airbnb listings, and the manipulative messages I found. I explained my relationship with my grandfather and with my family, detailed months of emotional manipulation I had experienced, and made clear I would no longer be villainized for inheriting money which I had never asked of, nor manipulated my way to receive. I listed specific examples of their manipulation tactics, from the orchestrated family dinners to the coordinated social media campaign. I brought the screenshots of how Sarah played the victim in one audience and the success story in another audience. I included how much money I had, already submitted her bank accounts, and records of her Airbnb income that she had not told me about. The response was mixed. Some relatives apologized for jumping to conclusions, saying they were influenced by Sarah's powerful victim story without hearing my side. Others doubled down on their criticism, suggesting that exposing Sarah's manipulative nature was in itself a betrayal. Some relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly became very interested in mediating the situation, although their solutions always involved my continuing to subsidize. Sarah and my parents did not repent, calling me cruel and selfish. Exposing Sarah's social media duplicity, they said, was an attempt to destroy her career prospects, and that I was simply jealous of her rising influence. My mother also said my grandfather would be ashamed of me for what I was saying to my sister, all the while conveniently forgetting that he had commented several times on how financially dependent she was on others. But they no longer had power over me. I was no longer beholden to them and their demands, and had ultimately decided that my own peace of mind was more important than their approval. I had always been a pawnbroker and a means to an end. It was a painful but liberating realization that they had never really cared about my feelings or well-being. It let me finally begin establishing the boundaries I should have set months ago. In the weeks that followed, I began therapy to help me work through everything that's taken place. My therapist has helped me understand that my grandfather's decision to will his estate mostly to me wasn't simply about our interests aligning. It was about him acknowledging and rewarding the authentic bond we'd forged over the decade. She's also helping me process the guilt and obligation that my family used to manipulate me, and showing me how their behavior falls into the patterns of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Thanks to therapy, I'm beginning to identify other patterns in my family system. Things I'd fully accepted as normal. My parents had always indulged Sarah's dependency while insisting that I be self-sufficient. How they had weaponized my accomplishments against me, rendering academic and career success proof of selfishness. The way they had always downplayed my emotional needs and magnified Sarah's. It has been a painful, albeit necessary, part of my healing process to recognize how these patterns had developed. I've had to make some hard decisions about my relationships moving forward. I've blocked Sarah from all social media and told my parents that I need space to heal. I have started a small foundation in memory of my grandfather to help young entrepreneurs and for technology education, two things that were important to him. The first initiative through the foundation will be a mentorship program that pairs experienced business leaders with aspiring entrepreneurs, a relationship that affords the kind of meaningful guidance my grandfather once provided me. The most difficult part has been coming to terms with the truth that money can actually change people, or maybe more accurately, it can show who they always were. The sense of entitlement I've been constantly confronted with in my sister, combined with the manipulation I've grown used to from my parents, and the way my family members seem ready to believe the worst about me, finally helped me make the conclusion that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your mind is to walk away from toxic relationships, even if it's with your family. It's a painful lesson, but one notable friend lesson, ultimately leading to greater self-awareness and stronger boundaries. In retrospect, perhaps my grandfather could have predicted some of this. He was always a great judge of character, and the way he chose to structure his will may well have been his last lesson to me about standing up for myself, not letting others take advantage of my generosity. He'd regaled me often with tales of his own encounters with relatives who sought to exploit his success, though I hadn't fully grasped how poignant they might be until this moment. Writing this post, I feel both sad and liberated. Sadness for the relationships that can never be repaired, but freedom from the burden of others' expectations and manipulation. I'm coming to terms with the fact that my well-being takes precedence, and when shit comes full circle with people, and they get salty about it, I am not everyone else's doormat, and that's okay. The peace I've gained by standing up for myself and setting boundaries is far greater than the discomfort that comes from family disapproval. I am also learning what family means to me and that I can redefine it in my own way. During this experience, I have found that some of my oldest friends feel more like family to me than my own relatives. They've challenged me, listened to me, and told me that I'm not alone. I have been building a chosen family with people who will not cross my boundaries, who celebrate my success without jealousy, who offer support without strings attached. To any of you who may have this kind of thing with family and inheritance going on, just know there is no shame in accepting when someone gives you something, and no one should ever make you feel guilty for such. You're under no obligation to grant anyone access to your inheritance, and you're not responsible for meeting others' expectations or paying for their lifestyles. Sometimes the most loving thing you can give yourself and others is the gift of setting very firm boundaries and then maintaining those boundaries, even when it hurts. I'm still processing it all, and I know this journey is not yet over. There will probably be even more family drama to work through, more manipulating to resist, and more tough calls to make. But for the first time in months, I feel as though I'm on firm footing. It's a privilege to be my grandfather's successor, not only of his wealth, but of his character and his ability to see people for what they are. But thank you for reading this far. Putting it all on paper has helped, and hopefully sharing my story will aid someone else out there in a similar situation. Just remember, you're not alone. And it's okay to choose your own peace over what others expect of you. Update: thanks for all your support. The awards. The participants asked whether there could be legal action against Sarah for subletting without authorization. I think the only way to progress for me is to not go there, and that is why I have chosen not to go there, because I think being completely cut off is best. Other people have also reached out to me because they have similar stories about fights over family inheritance. It is comforting but saddening to know that situations like this are common. And those wondering, yes, therapy is ongoing, and so is working on my relationships with family members who have been understanding and supportive. The process of healing has not been easy, but it has been worthwhile. I have discovered surprising allies in a few distant relatives. They have privately contacted me to share their own stories of financial drama with our families. My grandfather's Aunt Martha called me last week to share with me that they had experienced the same dynamics in their era. She narrated to me the many times that my grandfather was criticized and manipulated by his siblings after early business success. It has explicitly indicated to me that his will came from a place of coercion from other relatives. The foundation I have started in his name has given me purpose and healing, as such a significant amount of the grants goes to tech education for the underprivileged. It marks back to the conversations I had with my grandfather and makes the situation feel like I have made some good out of it. Many have encouraged me to set up the family in group counseling, but realized that the most dangerous thing for me would be cutting them off. I have followed this counsel. My therapist has also helped me realize that sometimes reconciliation cannot be forced, and assisted me in accepting the peace that leaves things as they are. Update 3. I have been blown away by the response this post has had. Hundreds of you have messaged me your stories of similar family inheritance dealings and tactics. It's made me realize how common these scenarios are and how important it is to talk about them openly. Thank you to everyone who has told me their story. All of your experiences and support got me through the feeling less alone in this whole thing. Final update: for anyone wondering how Sarah had been doing, she's had returned home to move in with our parents, and she's launched some new social media campaign about rising from adversity and wealth toxicity. Notice I said she and not we, because while it is so frustrating to watch her manipulate the narrative, I am focused on me and my way forward. Next month we are launching the Foundation's mentorship program, and I'm excited to help create something good that would make my grandfather proud.